Hello and welcome to B'nai Abraham Chabad. Welcome to the bright side. We'll start off with a prayer. Tehillim, Psalms 126. Shir Hamalois B'shuv Adonai Yashiv Aseon Ayinu Kecholmim Az Yimalois Chaypinu Ul Sharneinu Rina Az Yoim Vagoyim Higdil Adonai La'asoisim Eileh Higdil Adonai La'asos Imanu Hayinu Samechim Shuva Adonai Shviseinu Kafikim Banegev Hazoirim Bedima Berina Yiktsoiru Haloich Yelech Uvachai Noisei Meshach Hazara Bayava Berina Noisei Alamoisav. A song of ascents when the Lord will return the exiles of Zion. We will have been like dreamers. Then our mouth will be filled with laughter and our tongue with songs of joy. Then will they say among the nations, the Lord has done great things for these. The Lord has done great things for us, we were joyful. Lord, return our exiles as streams to arid soil. Those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. He goes along weeping, carrying the bag of seed. He will surely return with songs of joy, carrying his sheaves. Like the farmer who's asking God to send rain to make sure that the seeds were not planted in vain. We turn to God to send us our blessings and offer our thanks to God when we merit to reap the crop. Join me in this mitzvah of tzedakah. If you have a tzedakah box nearby, the theme of the bright side is how to look for the positive, look for the silver lining in each and every encounter, in each and every experience that we have. And so for today's story, the story takes us back about 60 years, where there was a young boy in Pittsburgh who came from a very prominent family in the Pittsburgh Jewish community. His name was Yale Butler. And when he was in 7th grade, he was a very creative child. He was an individualist, and he became the editor of the school newspaper. This was the first opportunity for him to express his creative writing, and he wanted to attract some attention. So what did he do? He decided to write a story, a fictional account. Now, one of the members of the Pittsburgh Jewish community, who was a very active and well-known figure, used to walk around with an army hat and jacket, and he had an untrimmed beard. His look reminded many people of Fidel Castro. So people started nicknaming this fellow Castro. Back in those days, Castro's dictatorship and his anti-American policies were not widely known. And so this young 7th grade child decided to expand on the visual association between this Jew in Pittsburgh and the image which he reminded people of Fidel Castro. So he wrote a fictional account of an invasion in Cuba, where Castro's troops were in danger of being wiped out. And in desperation, he called for his brethren in 770. They contacted the Rebbe, and the order was given. The Hasidim were to march on the Brooklyn Navy Yard, commandeer several submarines, and sail to Castro's rescue. The story attracted a lot of attention, but not the kind that Yale was hoping for. Many of his teachers and members of the Jewish community in Pittsburgh reprimanded him. They said, "This is not a joke, and you should apologize to the leaders of the Lubavitch community in Pittsburgh for this insult, And in fact, this first edition became his last edition as editor. He was feeling down, and a friend who was a Lubavitch chassid decided that this young boy should meet with the Rebbe. So he arranged a meeting, and one Sunday evening, Rabbi Spielman and this young Yale walk into the Rebbe's room at 770 in Brooklyn, and Rabbi Spielman leaves, which Yale wasn't expecting, so all of a sudden he feels a little bit uneasy, this young 7th grader alone with the Rebbe in the room. And the Rebbe turned to this child and spoke to him very warmly. And he told him that he's heard about his family in Pittsburgh, the good work that they do for the Jewish community, Jewish education. And the Rebbe then complimented Yale for his talent as a writer. All of a sudden, Yale realizes that there's a copy of the article on the Rebbe's desk. He becomes very anxious and fearful, full of anxiety. He's waiting for the Rebbe to speak, but the Rebbe didn't mention a word about the article. Instead, the Rebbe spoke to this young child about the obligations of each person to see their talents as a trust. If God gave you a specific talent, in your case, a creative writer, you should use them for a positive purpose, for the benefit of others. A writer should use his abilities to promote Jewish unity and love for one another. And all of a sudden, Yale felt that his feelings of anxiety and fear were going away, and he was mesmerized by this empowering message. The Rebbe had recognized the potential in this young future writer and gave him a positive message, a productive focus for him to use his skills as a writer in the future. And as he tells the story years later, Yale recalls that as a grown-up, he became the publisher of the B'nai B'rith Messenger. And in the paper, they would publish, every week, they would publish the Torah thoughts of the Rebbe. And there was an offer for subscription. He noticed that one of the people that had subscribed to the paper was the name M.M. Schneerson. In other words, even though the Rebbe had been receiving this paper free of charge, but the Rebbe felt that he wanted to subscribe to receive this weekly B'nai B'rith Messenger. He also said that the Rebbe once mentioned to somebody that this Yale had shown his unique skills as a writer since childhood. So, as a young child, when everybody else was criticizing this boy, putting an end to his writing career, the Rebbe saw the bright side. The Rebbe saw promise and potential, and reminded this child that he should always try to use his skills, his gifts, and his talents for a positive purpose. So the Rebbe was able to see through the rebellious veneer and focus on the energy and the spiritual accomplish that was waiting to be activated, that was waiting to be identified. This is the challenge for each of us. In any encounter that we have, when we meet someone, we can choose what type of eye to look at them, what type of lens to view them. Are we looking at them just on a surface level, or are we able to help them see themselves as somebody who was blessed with unique gifts and talents, as each of us was? And it's our obligation, responsibility, and privilege to be able to utilize our God-given talents to help others, to support others, and to bring positivity to other people's lives. Our guest this week is Dr. Dan Landsburg, who is with Penn Medicine, working in the oncology department. And Dan, welcome to the Bright Side program.
Thank you.
Our goal here is to focus a little bit on the positive side. We're all going through a very challenging time, and each person is dealing with it a little bit differently. But I believe that there's an increased recognition and appreciation for the healthcare heroes like yourself, doctors who are really on the front lines of this battle. So the first thing I want to say is just thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing to bring healing to this world and to keep our community safe during this difficult time.
Thank you.
Can you start with telling us a little bit about your work as a doctor, and what you specialize in, what type of healing you offer?
Sure. So I specialize in medical oncology, so using chemotherapy and other systemic therapies to treat patients with cancer. And my specialty within that is treating patients with lymphomas, non-Hodgkin and Hodgkin lymphomas, and doing some additional therapies like stem cell transplant, CAR T cells, and a few other specialized therapies. I practice primarily in the office. I do spend some time rounding in the hospital, and I do administrative work, helping to oversee our infusion suite and some of our inpatient units, and also do a little bit of research on the side, and spend about half my time caring for patients and the other half of the time doing administrative work and teaching.
And you've been able to see patients throughout this pandemic?
Yes, but in slightly different ways for some patients. And so we've been doing a fair number of telemedicine visits, so either telephone-based visits or televideo visits, and that has been about half of the patients I've seen in the past 6 weeks. And then I have been seeing patients in person in the office who need to be seen prior to treatments or have complex cases who really benefit from a face-to-face discussion. So a little bit of a change from my usual practice.
So for the most part, you've been able to continue seeing patients either in person or on video or on the phone throughout the crisis.
Yes, most patients still are being seen in one way or another when they were originally scheduled to be seen.
Okay, well that's good. One of the things we've been talking about is the patient's outlook. I've heard and read that the attitude of the patient, the mindset of the patient, and whether they're able to maintain a positive, optimistic outlook actually helps their physical healing. And I was wondering if you could comment on that from your experience, if you've seen that, how patients' attitudes actually impact their healing.
I would agree. A lot of patients actually find it easiest to focus on their treatments during this time and just say to themselves, I'm supposed to take a chemotherapy every 3 weeks, and I'm just going to come to the office every 3 weeks and put on my mask and, go for my treatment and keep thinking positively about things. And I find that those patients actually remain positive, and they seem less affected by the pandemic than perhaps some other patients. I think they're just very focused in their thinking and in their tasks, and I think that's very helpful. And I think a lot of what has been disrupted for all of us are our routines, and those who can stay positive and just keep with their routine, I think, have seemed to do the best and actually seem the happiest and most content during these times, and just continue to push through what they need to do.
Wow. So it sounds like through their challenges, they are actually able to find a certain focus um, in allowing them to keep working towards the goal of getting cured and getting treatment, which shows actually that if you have a purpose that you're working towards, if you have a goal that you're working towards, it can be really helpful. Um, so that's from the patient side. I'm wondering from the doctor side, um, what have you learned going through this experience? Perhaps you can share something with us from your perspective as a doctor um, that you've gained from this new reality.
Sure. So I actually have had very limited, if any, contact with COVID positive patients, which I think has been fortunate for me. There are lots of others who obviously are working with these patients every day, who I give a lot of credit to. And so my sort of thoughts and take on all of this is how, again, to sort of keep the normal for the patients who need to go through what they're going through, and also how to keep other patients out of harm's way who may not need to be in the office getting treatments, things of that sort. And so I'm using my mind in a different way to try to think about each patient and, sort of what the risk and benefit is of seeing them in the office versus not seeing them in person and maybe calling them, and what I might be missing, and really taking the time to do that. And in some ways, when you only see patients in person, it's fairly straightforward. You get data the same day, you can make decisions very easily. And now I've been challenged to think a little bit differently about how to look at the bigger picture for each patient. And so I've learned to stop and slow down and just make sure I'm really considering each patient's case, and also think about them and their families, and what risk it would bring to them to come to the office, and how we could work around that if not needed. So I think, like others, it's taking a different perspective on things, and just making sure that you're making the best recommendation for everybody that you're taking care of. And so it's been nice to sort of think that way. It's a little bit different. And it also makes me think that in the future, perhaps all the running around to come to doctor's appointments, to sit in traffic and park in the garage, and wait for the valet, may not have to be a reality for every patient. And we can do a lot more remotely and keep people happy, and from spending a lot of time waiting for healthcare when they can do it remotely. So it's been a refreshing look for a lot of patients, and for me to think about them. And then the other thing is, I also take a lot of I get a lot of strength, and I take a lot of confidence in working with the patients who are going through these routine treatments, who are reaching a goal, and I find a lot of joy in helping to care for those patients. And so these people that are pushing along with their treatments, and I've seen people finish treatments, people go into remission these past couple of weeks. I mean, that's been really exciting for me, and also he helps me to stay focused and think about the fact that we are able to just continue care for a lot of patients in the same way they were receiving it before, in spite of the limitations around us. So it's in sum trying to just think positively and about every patient, and really think about what's best for them, and reaching goals with patients on my side of things is very meaningful too.
Beautiful. So you mentioned earlier that there are some patients who need to be seen in person, and that when that's possible, you try to allow for that. I'm just wondering, is that because of the particular treatment that needs to be done in person, or is it more about the sensitive nature of the doctor-patient conversation that is more conducive in person? Are those in-person visits restricted to physically needing to come into the office, to the hospital, or is it also about the type of appointment that you're scheduling?
Right. That's a great question. And my thought on that has changed over the past few weeks. We we sort of don't have exact guidelines for which patients should come into the office and which ones should be seen remotely. But most of the time, I am seeing the patients who need to be evaluated in person before they receive a treatment to be examined or to check for toxicity. But there are patients who are not being treated or have treatments a little bit out in the distance who I have brought in for in-person visits because I think you just can't accomplish what you need to remotely. And it is always better to be face-to-face, particularly if there are challenging discussions to have about the goals of therapy or where the patient's prognosis has taken them. And that was sort of my thinking. And then I started utilizing more of these tele video visits because our software improved and there were no longer kinks in the system. And I had about an hour of tele video visit on Friday with a woman a little bit older than me who is doing well for her lymphoma, but developed some lung disease. And it was a very challenging conversation. I actually had a little bit of anxiety going into it because I've known the patient well and she became sick since I last saw her. And we had a really meaningful visit through an interface just like this one. And, it got me to thinking that perhaps just seeing the patient is important. And for her to have come into the office with an oxygen tank and everything, and to leave her daughters at home. I got to see her daughters through the telemedicine visit. I've never met them before. That really wouldn't have been the right thing for her. And the thing to do was to see her at home. And so I think seeing the patient is really important. And I have now thought about who I can see over the video rather, and who I need to see in person. And there's some changes as a result of that, but it really does help to look people in the eye and see what their expressions are, how they're feeling, and get a sense of what's going on. And so in that case, I felt that was the right recommendation to her to stay home and do the video visit. Other people, it's different, but you have to, again, think about each patient, think about, their needs for getting to see you in person. And if it's worth doing that right now, or there's an alternative way you can still make a meaningful connection with them.
So that's interesting. It sounds like you're saying that there are certain advantages to being able to Zoom with patients or have these video chats, even over having them come into the office, and perhaps looking into the future, that might become more mainstream, even when things do go back to normal. They will have more of this type of interaction and relationship with doctors over video.
I agree. And, particularly practicing in Philadelphia where it's congested and lots of people from surrounding areas don't like coming into town. I mean, it's a perfect way to interact with patients who may not otherwise be able or want to see you in person. And so I think that is something that's here to stay. And I think figuring out the patients for whom we should use this interface down the road will be one of our challenges, but probably one of the benefits of all of this.
So that's a bright side.
Absolutely.
Were you doing any of this before the pandemic? Were you doing this type of consultation via video?
I wasn't. A few of my colleagues were, but we really had it restricted to a select number of diagnoses or cases or scenarios, and now we've opened it up. Even when we started with these restrictions in March, we weren't allowed to do these tele-video visits with new patients. And then a few weeks into our changes, we decided that new patients could be seen remotely as well. And it's been really easy to schedule new patients, find an hour that we're both available to call them. And so it's really helped. And so our guidance has been, even in June or whenever things start to get a little bit more back to normal, we should continue these type of visits. And I'm actually excited to do it. I think it's the right format for some of our patients.
Okay, so it's a really interesting silver lining that I hadn't thought of about this experience, that it can actually make the relationship between the patient and the doctor smoother. Obviously, given the right conditions and given the right circumstances, there's always going to be the need for in-person visits, but not necessarily does every single doctor visit have to be in person. And there are some benefits to having it not in person, that we've been forced to train ourselves as a result of this pandemic.
Yes.
Okay. Any closing thoughts that you would like to share about something positive or something like a positive message that we can all learn from, as we deal with the reality?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, two messages. One is first that, I really appreciate all the care that a lot of the frontline providers who are really interacting directly with these COVID patients are providing. I mean, they are taking risks themselves to see these patients and provide them care. And I think they are really, the heroes of this pandemic, and I give them a lot of credit. The second is that, it's nice to see life go on in my profession and in care, that our patients who are being treated for cures continue on those treatments and they are cured, and patients who are getting good benefit from therapies, even in an incurable setting, just continue on. And that those of us who aren't seeing the frontline patients and managing the complications of this virus are able to continue their care they provide to patients in a modified way, albeit, but be able to continue to see success in their patients. And I think that's great. I was very worried that we would have to stop seeing patients in person for a period of time, or would have, to scramble to find, chairs in our infusion suite to treat people. And none of that has happened. And everybody who needs to be seen and treated is, and they get the same excellent care that our team provides them and has provided them before. So it's sort of that life goes on in medicine outside of the pandemic. And I think that's really important, because when things hopefully quiet down in the coming weeks, we need to make sure that patients with other medical problems are continuing to receive good care. And I think we've been able to do that. And I think that's encouraging for the majority of us who fortunately haven't been infected with this virus, that we can still, receive the care that we need. And I think that's a really important message as well.
Great. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and to give us these positive messages, positive takeaways. It's always important and healthy to focus on the bright side. And thank you for sharing your experience with us, and thank you for all the critical work that you're doing every single day to add healing to this world and bring hope to your patients.
You're welcome, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this series.
Wonderful, wonderful. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
Okay, all the best. Thank you for joining us. And I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Thank you to Diane Tucker for dedicating this series to the memory of Dick Tucker. If you enjoy this program, please consider even a small contribution to B'nai Abraham Chabad. You can donate online at phillyshul.com. Help us keep our virtual doors open. And we'll see you next week.